Hey guys, tonight we're traveling somewhere soft, sparse, and deceptively simple, the quiet, calculated world of Japanese Zen gardens. You're standing at the wooden gate of a Kyoto monastery, early morning mist clinging to your sleeves, the scent of damp cedar mingling with the faint aroma of roasted barley tea. A wide swath of raked gravel stretches before you like a pale sea, punctuated by carefully placed rocks that seem frozen mid-conversation. Not a single leaf dares to fall out of place. You might think this will be peaceful. But you probably won't survive this, because you're about to spend a day with the monks, who have been crafting this illusion of nothingness with a level of patience that would break most modern humans within minutes. Every ripple of gravel, every patch of moss, every stone is a study in restraint. And now, you're expected to help. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to see where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin by removing your shoes, always the shoes, before stepping onto the wooden walkway that creaks slightly beneath your weight. The abbot gives you a slow nod, the kind that carries centuries of implication. You're handed a wooden rake, with wide tines and a polished handle worn smooth by generations of hands. The gravel before you is fine, pale, and freshly combed, straight lines running in perfect symmetry across the empty space. You take one step forward and immediately ruin everything. The sound is like a whisper screaming. This is karesansui, dry landscape gardening. There's no water, no blossoms, no showy sculptures. It's all metaphor. The gravel represents water. The rocks? Islands. Mountains. The act of raking? A meditation. A prayer. Possibly a punishment. Historians still argue whether Zen gardens originated purely from religious ideals or as a form of aristocratic aesthetics. Either way, your new monastic co-workers are deeply committed. One monk rakes in slow, smooth arcs, his body swaying like seaweed. Another crouches near a boulder, staring as if waiting for it to speak. You're not sure what your role is, but judging by the skeptical glances, it's mostly don't mess it up. You spend an hour learning to hold the rake properly. Apparently, you were gripping it with too much tension. It should be like holding a baby bird, your supervisor says, without a trace of irony. You ask what pattern you're supposed to rake. He replies, "What does the gravel want to say?" You nod wisely, pretending you understand. Fun fact, some of these gardens were never meant to be walked in. They're meant to be viewed from a seated position, like a painting that rearranges itself with every blink. You sit down on the ingawa, the wooden platform along the temple's edge, and watch as the shadows of rocks stretch and shrink with the sun. It's hypnotic. Then you remember you're supposed to be helping. As you return to your gravel plot, you notice something odd. One of the stones is placed slightly off-center. You point this out, helpfully. The monk looks at you like you've insulted his ancestors. Asymmetry is balance, he says. Perfection is vulgar. You offer to move it. He doesn't respond. That's probably for the best. You're beginning to realize this isn't gardening in the traditional sense. It's performance, philosophy, and very quiet drama. Legend has it that in some temples, head monks would intentionally leave one line of raking undone, so no one would mistake the garden for something finished. Completion, after all, is an illusion. You consider how that might apply to your inbox. Later, during the tea break, which lasts exactly 9 minutes and 20 seconds, one of the elder monks shares a story. Apparently, the most famous Zen garden in Japan, Ryoanji, has 15 stones, but you can only see 14 from any one angle. The missing stone? It represents the limits of human perception. You sip your barley tea and stare at your gravel. You can see, at most, a faint resemblance to a beach. Maybe. You think you're starting to get it. Then the bell rings. Time to rake again. You take your position and start to mimic the patterns you saw earlier, long curves, short lines, a spiral here and there. But it's hard. The gravel resists. Your rake catches on a hidden root. One line wobbles. You try to fix it, but the fix looks worse. The monk watches in silence. You wonder if he's judging your soul based on these ridges. Did you know the gravel itself is carefully selected for its sound? Some temples use a special type of white sand from the Shokakuji temple region, prized for the way it crunches, yes, crunches, underfoot. It's part of the experience. Like how certain meditation bells ring at just the right frequency to tickle your inner ear. These gardens aren't just visual, they're sonic, tactile, Emotional. One monk tells you the rake is an extension of the breath. Another says the rake is the breath. A third, less poetic monk suggests you try raking slower, with less, struggle face. By the end of the day, your back is sore, your palms are blistered, and your plot of gravel still looks like it was done by a distracted toddler. But the monk pats your shoulder and says, "The effort is the art." You're not sure if that's encouragement or a polite dismissal, but you accept it with a bow. As the sun dips behind the curved rooflines of the temple, the rocks cast long shadows across the raked patterns. You realize they look like islands after all. Not literal islands, of course, but the idea of islands. And maybe that's the point. The next morning, you're up before the sun, stomach rumbling quietly beneath your robes as the monks gather again in the stillness of dawn. Today's task is deceptively simple: place one stone. That's it. Just one. You're led to a corner of the garden where there's an empty patch of gravel, about the size of a large bath towel, and an impressively lichen-covered boulder sitting beside it on a cloth mat. Around this humble stone are four monks, all deep in discussion. Not heated, exactly, but intense. You'd think they were negotiating a hostage release. One gestures toward the stone's angle. Another points to the light. A third closes his eyes and exhales through his nose, as if to say, "None of you understand the spirit of this rock." You sit cross-legged nearby, trying to stay very still. Maybe they'll forget you're here. But eventually, the senior monk turns to you and says, "So, where does it belong?" You blink. This is a test. You look at the gravel, then the stone, then the sun, then the shadows. You try to remember what they said yesterday, something about islands? Or was it mountains? Or maybe turtles? One monk said stones represent animals, but another insisted they're metaphors for absence. Historians still argue whether Zen garden stones were originally intended as Buddhist cosmological symbols or simply aesthetic elements influenced by Chinese landscapes. Either way, your guess is about to be very public. You suggest placing the stone slightly off-center, just a little tilt, facing southeast. One monk raises an eyebrow. Another nods. The third folds his arms and stares into space, clearly unconvinced. You've triggered an entire philosophical sidebar. They begin debating again. The word mu is mentioned several times. You know it means nothingness, but somehow it sounds personal this time. And here's the thing, the stone doesn't actually do anything. It doesn't glow, or move, or trickle water. It just sits. But that sitting must contain intent, balance, and suggestion. It's like placing a comma in an invisible sentence, and hoping the sentence makes people weep. You try to lift it. It's heavier than expected, which seems fitting. A monk rushes in to correct your grip. No, turn it. The face should bow. You wanted to ask, what face? But you just nod and pretend you see it too. Maybe you do. There's a slope on one side that seems more contemplative. Eventually, the stone is lowered into place. Carefully. Tenderly. As if tucking in a sleeping cat. Then everyone stands back, squinting, arms crossed, silent. You break the silence. So, are we done? The oldest monk shakes his head slowly. We'll know in a week. Apparently, stones need to settle. To feel the sun. To gather moss. To see if the shadows respect them. There's even a chance it might be moved again. This is not HGTV. Fun side note, in traditional manuals like the Sakateki, one of the oldest Japanese garden texts from the 11th century, gardeners are advised to listen to the wishes of the stones. That's not metaphor. That's the literal instruction. You imagine some guy 1,000 years ago, ear pressed to a rock, muttering, "Speak louder." The stone is now in place, but you're not off the hook. One monk asks if you've considered the void around it. This is not sarcasm. In Zen, the space between things, is just as important as the things themselves. That patch of gravel around the stone? It's doing heavy lifting. It's framing meaning, not just filling gaps. You nod again. Because at this point, confusion is just part of the enlightenment process. A light breeze stirs the robe at your ankles. The gravel sparkles slightly. For one strange moment, you think you understand. Not in words, but in feeling. The stone doesn't need to be explained, it needs to rest. And then one of the monks claps and says, "Break time." Just like that, the spell is broken. Everyone heads inside for a warm rice porridge and pickled radish. You follow, your brain swirling with dust, rocks, and nothingness. Over lunch, the monk next to you leans in and says, "Do you know about the hidden turtles?" You choke slightly on your rice. He grins. In some Zen gardens, stones are arranged to resemble animals, turtles, cranes, even dragons. But only if you know how to see them. You ask if the rock you placed today is a turtle. He shrugs. Maybe. Maybe just a pause in the stream. Later that afternoon, you return to the stone. Alone this time. The sun has shifted, and now its shadow stretches long and soft across the gravel. You kneel and study it. You still don't know if it's an island or a bird or a question mark. But it fits. Somehow. You sit there longer than you mean to. By the time the bell chimes for evening meditation, you haven't moved. One of the younger monks walks past, glances at your work, and says, "That's not terrible." You smile. That's the highest praise you've heard all day. The next day begins not with stone but with rhythm, specifically, yours. You're raking again. And this time, the monks don't offer any instructions. Just a nod toward the far end of the garden and a fresh rake placed in your hands like a sword before a duel. Only the enemy here is imperfection, and, let's be honest, your own lack of upper body coordination. The gravel crunches softly underfoot as you step into your assigned zone. You inhale deeply, plant your feet shoulder width apart, and pull the rake gently across the white surface. A wobbly line emerges. You try again. It's worse. It curves where it shouldn't. The symmetry is a disaster. Your rake skips like it's afraid of commitment. This is where the real discipline kicks in. Unlike yesterday's stone debate, this task is lonely. Monks rake in silence, spaced far apart, like quiet orbiting moons. Your job is to replicate a perfect pattern, rows of evenly spaced lines, cleanly drawn without pause. But your arms twitch, your grip tightens, and the rake refuses to obey. You go back and redo a line, then realize you've disturbed the edge of the next one. It's like playing Jenga with dust. And yet, it's meditative. The repetition. The sound. The slow movement. You begin to find a rhythm, syncing your breathing with each pull of the rake. A line here. A line there. You think you're getting the hang of it until, bam, your rake snags on something. You peer down and find a single acorn, smugly ruining your entire meditative groove. Fun fact, in some monasteries, monks sift the gravel before raking. Not just to remove leaves or pebbles, but to aerate the surface, like fluffing a pillow. The more neurotic the gardener, the longer the prep work. Some monks even level the surface using boards and strings to ensure not a single grain is out of place. You stare at your rake and sigh. You've skipped all that. No wonder your garden looks like a toddler's sketchpad. Historians still argue whether raked patterns originally held symbolic meanings. Some say they represented waves, others think they were just abstract suggestions of impermanence. One theory proposes they mimic ancient Chinese brush paintings, rendered in gravel instead of ink. But to you, right now, they mostly represent frustration. You pause and glance over at another monk's section. His curves are elegant. Crisp. The gravel flows like calligraphy. You wonder if he's been secretly trained by sand drawing dolphins. Meanwhile, your lines resemble panic attacks in topographical form. He notices your stare and walks over. "You're raking from your wrists," he says quietly. "Use your center. Hips, not hands." You blink. This is raking, not salsa. But you try it. Shift your stance. Bend your knees slightly. And then, something changes. The rake glides smoother. The lines stretch longer. Your arms stop trembling. The gravel gives in, just a little. You even exhale without realizing it. It's not perfect, but it's peaceful. Until a wind gust ruins 3 rows. You stare in horror. The gravel pattern is destroyed. The monk beside you doesn't even flinch. "Good," he says, nodding slowly. Now you begin again. You're not sure if he's encouraging or quietly enjoying your pain. You rake again. Slower. More deliberate. A little less desperately. You let go of the need to make it pretty. You just focus on the rhythm. And as you do, your thoughts quiet. Even your inner critic takes a nap. For 10 straight minutes, you forget about everything but the path of the rake. Back, forward. Inhale, exhale. And then, without warning, you stop. Not because you're done. But because the gravel tells you to. You step back and look at your work. It's okay. But that doesn't matter. What matters is the act. The attention. The presence. You've begun to understand the garden isn't about making something beautiful, it's about practicing presence in an environment that erases the noise. Did you know some raking patterns are intentionally destroyed at the end of each day? Not out of spite, but to honor the idea that nothing should last forever. like ice sculptures, or limited-time fast food items. It's all about letting go. Every morning, a new beginning. Every night, a soft undoing. You sit down on the wooden platform, watching the last rays of sun stretch across your pattern. The long shadows make the gravel look deeper than it is, as if it could pull you in. A bell rings softly in the distance, signaling evening prayer. The monks begin drifting toward the hall, their sandals whispering across the wooden floor. You stay a little longer, just watching the light shift and fade. And just before you leave, you notice something curious. A small imperfection, a single stone out of place, barely noticeable, sitting just a bit too far from the others. You glance at your rake, then back at the flaw. You leave it, because maybe, just maybe, it was meant to be there all along. You wake up sore. Your shoulders ache like you've been doing construction work, which, technically, you have. Only the buildings aren't made of brick or wood. They're made of suggestion and patience. Today, though, you don't even get to touch the gravel. Instead, a monk hands you a piece of parchment and a small bamboo brush. No ink. Just the brush. Before you shape the garden, he says, you shape the mind. You sit cross-legged on the floor of the planning hall, staring at the blank page in front of you. You're told to draw silence. That's the literal instruction. Not a shape. Not a map. Silence. You look around. No one else seems confused. One monk is dabbing invisible lines onto his parchment like he's sketching the wind. Another is holding his brush above the page, perfectly still. One more has already rolled up his scroll and is now meditating, probably having achieved enlightenment while you're still wondering if drawing silence is some kind of trap. This is your introduction to the invisible blueprint of Zen gardens. Before a single pebble is laid, before the first moss patch is nestled into damp soil, the garden exists entirely in the mind of the designer. And that mind must be still, focused, empty enough to imagine the emptiness. The design process, you learn, is governed not by aesthetics but by philosophy. It's not about symmetry or grandeur, it's about evoking mood, distance, timelessness. The garden is supposed to offer a place to get lost inside yourself. Which is funny, because you feel very, very lost already. You start making faint, hesitant strokes. A line here. A curve there. You think of the patterns you raked yesterday. The way they curved around the stones. You try to recreate that sense of flow. But every time you look back at your paper, it seems off. Forced. Loud, somehow. The silence won't settle. Did you know the earliest Japanese garden designs were influenced by Chinese Taoist and Buddhist principles? Historians still debate how much of Japan's Zen tradition was homegrown versus imported, especially regarding its landscape architecture. But by the time of the Muromachi period, Japanese designers had distilled the garden into something deeply local, spare, quiet, almost confrontational in its minimalism. You scratch a faint circle onto your parchment. Then erase it with your sleeve. That wasn't it. You sit for a while longer, letting your eyes unfocus, your breath slow. Then, instinctively, you draw a line from one edge of the page to the other, just a single stroke. Straight. Thin. Clean. The monk watching you nods. Now you're listening. Over the next hour, you learn more about how Zen gardens are planned, not with blueprints, but with storyboards. Every stone is a character. Every patch of gravel is dialogue. The spaces in between? Subtext. You're not just composing a layout. You're composing a tension between stillness and suggestion. It's not where do I want to place this rock? It's how does this rock change the meaning of space? There's a word for this, kukan. It means space, but also implies the atmosphere of space. The feeling it holds. Imagine entering a room that makes you want to whisper. That's kukan. A good Zen garden whispers, too, without ever saying a word. A fringe tidbit you overhear from a younger monk. Some garden masters in Kyoto would meditate for weeks before sketching a single design. One supposedly refused to begin a new layout until a certain crane appeared outside his window. Whether that's dedication or procrastination remains unclear. Eventually, your page is filled with faint lines, some meaningful, some not. It looks more like a dream than a plan. But the monks seem satisfied. One of them takes your scroll and places it beside others, all filled with equally cryptic shapes. Then he turns and says, "Now let's walk the garden. See if it matches." You follow them out into the sunlight. The garden is the same one you've been raking, but somehow it feels different now. You're not looking at it anymore. You're reading it. A curve of gravel isn't just pretty. It's a path for the eye. That rock isn't just a rock, It's where your thoughts trip and fall, then sit down to rest. The narrowness of the walkway? That's intentional, meant to slow your stride, to turn your journey inward. Even the blank spaces between features, they hum with attention, like someone listening. And here's the strangest part, once you understand this language, it's hard to unsee. Even outside the garden. That patch of trees you glimpse between buildings? That's a frame. That stray stone by the path? A visual pause. Suddenly, everything starts to feel composed. You don't say much for the rest of the day. Neither do the monks. But you notice their glances, small, approving nods. Like you've been let in on a secret that isn't secret at all. It's just quiet. By evening, you're back at the drafting hall, this time invited to watch as the senior monk unrolls a weathered scroll. It's a design for a temple garden from centuries ago. The ink is faded, the lines precise. A few gentle annotations float along the edges, stone here like wind touching water, space for breath, curve around silence. It's a poem disguised as a map. You sit there, tracing the lines with your eyes, not daring to touch. And for the first time, you don't feel the need to understand it all. Some things aren't puzzles to be solved. They're mirrors. And tonight, you're finally starting to see your own reflection in the gravel. The next morning, something strange happens. You're told not to go into the garden. Instead, the monks lead you outside the temple walls, to the back path, winding through tall cedars and under the shadow of Mount Hiei. It's quiet. Even the birds seem to whisper. At first, you think you've been reassigned to yard work. But then the abbot points to a pine tree growing just beyond the outer fence of the Zen garden. "You see that tree?" he asks. You nod. Of course you do. It's big. Kind of dramatic. Branches crooked like old fingers, bark the color of dried blood. "It's part of the garden," he says. You blink. "But it's outside the wall." He nods again. "Exactly." And just like that, you're introduced to one of the cleverest illusions in Japanese garden design, shake, or borrowed scenery. It's a technique that extends the boundaries of the garden using natural or man-made features, trees, hills, rooftops, even clouds. If it's visible from inside the garden, it can be framed, reflected, or suggested. Your garden may be small, but with shake, it feels endless. Back inside the garden, you start noticing it everywhere. A patch of gravel slopes upward in perfect alignment with a distant stone stair. A wooden beam frames a view of autumn maples like a painting. The roofline of the temple across the courtyard? Perfectly mirrored by the curve of a mossy mound near the gravel bed. None of it is accidental. Historians still argue whether shake was originally invented for Zen gardens or if it evolved from earlier aristocratic estate gardens, which used scenic views as a form of visual wealth. Either way, Zen monks took the idea and turned it into a metaphysical game: make the invisible feel present. Make what isn't yours feel like it was always meant to be. The pine tree, for example. From the central viewing platform of the temple, it's framed by two vertical wooden pillars. Your eye naturally drifts toward it. You realize you've been looking at it all along, just not seeing it. You're tasked with studying it for the day. No raking. No sketching. Just sitting, watching, and understanding how it interacts with the garden. At first, it feels silly. You stare at a tree. It doesn't move. It doesn't glow or whisper or do anything worth narrating. But after an hour, your eyes begin to soften. You notice the way the needles shift in the breeze. The subtle gradient of green. The angle of the trunk bending ever so slightly east, like it's bowing toward the gravel sea. Then something curious happens. The tree becomes part of the composition. Not in a mystical sense, but in a visual one. That bare spot in the gravel? It reflects the negative space under its lowest branch. The dark shadow on the temple roof? It echoes the shadow falling across the base of the tree. It's as if the garden is in conversation with the world outside, and the tree is whispering back. The monks explain that shake works best when it's unnoticed. The borrowed elements must not distract or dominate. They must support the mood of the garden. A flashy blossom or bright red bridge would break the spell. You're not painting a postcard. You're arranging a memory. There's a reason, they tell you, that most Zen gardens use evergreens, rocks, gravel, and moss, not showy seasonal flowers. Change is subtle. Movement is implied. You might not see the seasons shift, but you feel them in the silence. A younger monk shares a French fact over lunch. During the Edo period, some garden designers became obsessed with shake to the point of manipulating tree lines on distant mountains, trimming them or planting trees to improve the borrowed view. Imagine having the gall to landscape a mountaintop just so your tiny gravel patch feels better composed. The ambition is deeply monastic. Back at the garden, you're handed a small wooden frame. You're told to hold it up and move it around until you find a view. You look through the frame like a camera. At first, it's just scenery. But then you tilt it slightly, and suddenly, the garden becomes a photograph. A stone aligns perfectly with a tree in the distance. A shadow slices diagonally across your frame. It's art. But only if you see it that way. That's the magic of shake. It teaches you that beauty isn't built. It's noticed. And if you're paying attention, even the things outside your control, the tree that's not yours, the mountain that never responds, can become part of your creation. Later that evening, you're invited to sit on the viewing deck with the others as dusk settles in. No one speaks. The light dims. The pine tree glows faintly in the fading sun. Crickets begin their tiny orchestral warm-up. And then, as if on cue, a crane flutters down and lands on a branch, silent, elegant, uninvited, perfect. No one reacts. Not even a breath. Because this exact moment, is what the garden was waiting for. The first frost arrives before sunrise. You feel it in your toes the moment you step out, crunchy gravel beneath your straw sandals, breath steaming in small, apologetic clouds. Winter has arrived in Kyoto, and it's not here to make things easier. Your task today is deceptively poetic: rake the garden to capture the texture of impermanence. You were hoping for something more like hot tea or maybe a nap, but instead, you're handed a rake and led to a freshly flattened gravel section. The monks say nothing. They just nod and walk away. You're left alone with your thoughts, and the rising cold. The gravel is frozen. Your rake skips and skitters like it's skating on marbles. Each pull is a small battle. The rake teeth scrape against ice-crusted pebbles, leaving fractured, stubborn lines. No matter how slow you go, the gravel resists, and your pattern looks like a panic attack caught mid-sneeze. But it's not just your hands that struggle, it's your mind. Nothing you make will last. By noon, the frost will melt. By tomorrow, the wind will scatter the lines. By next week, someone else will rake over your work. And somehow, that's the point. Zen gardens in winter are quiet in a new way. The usual sounds, soft rake swishes, birdsong, distant footfalls, are muffled under the weight of cold air. The moss, usually so lush and vibrant, has dulled to deep browns and sleeping greens. Even the rocks seem heavier. You half expect them to sigh. Did you know that in winter, some temples choose not to rake at all? They let snow blanket the gravel untouched, nature's own pattern, with drifts instead of lines. Historians still argue whether this seasonal letting go is a philosophical statement or just monks wisely avoiding frostbite. Either way, there's something hauntingly beautiful about a garden left alone. You pause to flex your fingers, already pink and stiff. A monk appears with a wooden bucket of warm ash water. He doesn't speak, but gestures for you to soak your hands. The heat stings for a moment, then seeps in. It's the best thing you've felt in days. He stays to watch you rake. At first, you feel pressure, your lines are jagged, uneven. But the monk just observes, silently chewing on something, maybe a roasted chestnut, maybe wisdom. Eventually, he says, "You're raking like you're trying to finish." You stop. He continues, "Rake like it's already finished." And somehow, that unlocks something. You change your grip. You stop thinking about the pattern. You let your arms move the way breath moves, in, out, slow, unhurried. Your rake doesn't scratch now, it glides, even over the icy spots. You draw one long arc. Then another. They intersect like waves. You step back. It's not symmetrical. But it flows. The monk nods once. Then leaves. You keep raking. Not to create something, but to let something emerge. The gravel begins to catch the low sun, turning your uneven lines into shadows. The cold still bites, but it no longer feels adversarial. It's just part of the moment. Here's a quirky tidbit you overhear later. Some Zen garden designers believed frost was necessary for certain types of gravel. That only in the cold would it reflect light properly, only under hardship would its beauty become visible. You write that down in your mental notebook, under metaphors that hit too close. You join the others for lunch: hot miso soup with daikon, pickled plums, and a single steaming sweet potato. It's the best thing you've eaten in weeks. Maybe ever. Hunger and humility will do that. After lunch, you're invited to sweep a stone pathway, where falling leaves gather like gossip. The path winds through the outer edge of the temple grounds. It's framed by tall trees, bare now, their branches like calligraphy strokes. The crunch of your broom on the cold stone becomes a new rhythm. You glance over and catch a glimpse of your gravel section. Your arcs are half melted now. The sun has shifted. The frost is retreating. Your pattern, like breath on glass, is fading. And yet, it feels complete. Not because it lasted, but because you didn't need it to. That evening, during silent meditation, you sit facing the garden. Snow begins to fall, light at first, like rice grains. It settles into the gravel softly, respectfully, without arrogance. It doesn't erase the patterns. It whispers over them. The monk beside you opens one eye and murmurs, "Tomorrow, the garden will be wide." That's also correct. And you smile. Because you finally understand, perfection is not control. It's surrender. Your knees crack as you crouch into place, bamboo tongs in one hand, a pouch of tiny green filaments in the other. Today's assignment, you've been told, is about patience. As if everything you've done here hasn't already been the spiritual Olympics of waiting, but this time, there's no rake. No gravel. No silent debates about the face of a stone. Today, you plant moss. Sounds cozy, right? You imagine soft, pillowy mats spreading under trees like nature's shag carpet. What you don't imagine is spending hours on your hands and knees, tweezering microscopic tufts into damp dirt with the trembling reverence of a medieval scribe transcribing a sacred text. You begin in a shaded corner of the garden where the gravel gives way to bare earth. It's cold and damp and smells like old tea and rain. You press your first pinch of moss gently into the soil. The monk watching you gives a small nod. Encouraging. You've passed step 1. Now repeat it 500 times. Moss, as it turns out, is the secret backbone of many Zen gardens. It thrives in low light, high humidity, and silence. It's slow. Humble. Almost shy. But when cultivated properly, it transforms a garden into something ancient, as if it were always there. Like ruins that grew instead of decaying. Some of the moss you're planting was harvested from the temple's older sections, carefully propagated over decades. Yes, decades. That means someone started this particular patch when dial-up internet was still a thing. Maybe even before cassette tapes. You pause to appreciate that kind of long game. Historians still argue about how central moss was in early Zen gardens. Some believe it was merely a byproduct of neglect. Temples too poor to re-gravel their paths ended up with moss-covered terrain. Others argue it was always deliberate, a living metaphor for quiet persistence. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, as usual. And did you know there are over 40 varieties of moss used in Japanese gardens? The monks can name them like favorite poems: Himikoke, Sunagoke, Kokdama. One even jokes that moss is the temple's most obedient novice. It never complains, never hurries, and always bows to gravity. As you plant each tuft, you begin to understand the intimacy of the task. You're not landscaping, you're tucking something in. Each patch must rest against a gentle slope or in the curl of a root, in a spot where water can linger and light can filter through just right. You aren't choosing locations. You're listening for them. At some point, you lose track of time. The act becomes everything. There's only damp earth, green softness, and the hush of your breath. When you finally stand up, knees groaning like century-old floorboards, you look back at your work. It's barely visible. Just a faint dusting of green, shy against the brown earth. The monk beside you smiles faintly. Good. It should look like it forgot you were here. Later, you're invited to visit a part of the temple usually closed to guests, the inner courtyard garden, hidden behind sliding paper screens. You slide the panel open and feel it hit your chest. Moss everywhere. It's like stepping into a dream remembered by the forest. The ground is thick with it, soft as velvet, bright in some places, deep and dusky in others. Stones rise like sleeping beasts beneath the green. Ferns bow gently from the edges. And not a single flower in sight. You walk the narrow stepping stones that lead across the courtyard, carefully placed to keep your footfalls light. Every sound is softened. Even your thoughts feel muffled. The monk says nothing. He just watches as you kneel beside one of the larger stones and gently press your palm to the moss. It's cool, damp, alive, and ancient. You whisper without meaning to, "It feels like time." The monk nods. Yes. That's what it's for. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some temples use tiny wooden fences, not to keep people out, but to remind them that moss needs space. In Kyoto, there's even a moss temple, Saihoji, where visitors must copy sutras before being allowed in. A trade, your intention, for the garden's presence. You don't leave footprints in moss. At least, not visible ones. But you leave something. And the moss, in return, leaves something in you, a slowness, a hush, a kind of humility that lingers like morning mist. As dusk settles, you find yourself sitting at the edge of the moss field, legs folded, watching the green darken with the sky. The monks begin lighting lanterns inside the temple, their glow catching in the leaves above. You see a single moth drift down and land gently on the moss, resting without rustling. And in that moment, you realize, all this work, this day spent hunched and sore, this labor invisible to most eyes, isn't about shaping a garden. It's about letting time sit still for a while. Quiet. Breathing. Soft as moss. Tonight, you're not in the garden at all. Instead, you're in the tool shed. And it smells exactly like you'd expect. Old cedar, damp linen, and just a whisper of rust. A sleepy monk with the energy of a cat in late afternoon hands you a cloth, a whetstone, and your new best friend, an old wooden rake with iron tines that have seen centuries of gravel warfare. This one was Master Ikeda's, he says, reverently. You look at it. It looks crooked. Like it's been left out in the rain. Twice. Fix it, the monk says, and shuffles away. So begins your quiet apprenticeship in garden tool maintenance, an art form unto itself. Because in the world of Zen gardening, tools aren't disposable. They're cherished. Passed down. Whispered about. Tended like bonsai. You sit cross-legged on the wooden floor, feeling like a samurai who's been handed a sword and told, make it less embarrassing. The rake is dry, its handle splintered, the iron dull. But there's character in it. Not beauty, exactly, more like stubborn dignity. You begin by sanding the handle, working with slow, even strokes. The wood awakens beneath the friction. Dust rises in golden flecks, catching the afternoon light that filters through the narrow slats of the wall. You start to forget where you are. There's only the scrape of sandpaper, the weight of time in your hands. It's funny. No one told you this would be part of the training. But of course it is. In a world where rocks are arranged like sentences, why wouldn't the punctuation, the rake, deserve reverence? Historians still argue whether early Zen garden tools were designed specifically for aesthetics or adapted from farming implements. But by the Edo period, specialized rakes and brooms were already in use, each with a distinct purpose: wide-tooth rakes for gravel, thin reed brooms for moss, delicate brushes for smoothing fine edges. A toolkit, yes, but also a vocabulary. After sanding, you begin oiling the wood with a cloth soaked in camellia oil. The scent is faint but floral. The wood darkens, sighs. You swear the rake feels grateful. You set the handle aside and turn to the tines. Now comes the meditative part, sharpening. You work the iron gently against the whetstone, back and forth, just like raking. Inhale, draw. Exhale, return. You catch yourself matching breath to motion again. The whetstone hisses softly, like it approves. A monk wanders in, peeks over your shoulder, and nods. Careful, he murmurs. Too sharp and it scars the gravel. Not sharp enough, and it disrespects the line. You blink. There's a gravel rake Goldilocks zone, he grins. Everything has a center. After an hour, the tines gleam faintly. The handle is smooth, supple. You test it in your hands. Balanced. Strong. The tool is ready, not for display, but for purpose. And it hits you, you're not restoring this rake to look good. You're restoring it to belong. To continue being part of the conversation that happens in lines and curves and silence. Here's a curious aside: in some temples, broken tools aren't thrown away, they're buried. Literally. Given funerals. Rakes, brooms, even worn-out gloves are sometimes returned to the earth, as a final thank you for their service. It sounds ridiculous until you realize that in this world, everything is treated with awareness. Even the disposable is honored. As twilight falls, the monk returns and gestures toward a drawer near the back of the shed. Inside is an assortment of odd implements: small brass spoons, horsehair brushes, even a carved wooden tool that looks like a cross between a comb and a fan. These, you learn, are finisher's tools for detail work. Some are for drawing fine borders around rocks. Others for smoothing curves. One, apparently, is just for fixing the edge where the gravel meets the moss. You're handed one of the comb-like finishers and told to walk the margin. It's not a metaphor. Your job is to trace the very edge of the gravel bed, where it meets stone or wood, and make sure the transition is seamless. No roughness. No spill. No interruption in flow. You kneel at the garden's edge, rake in hand, and begin combing. It's not glamorous. No one applauds. But something inside you clicks into focus. This absurdly tiny act, is the hinge of the whole garden. The line between intention and accident. Between effort and ease. It takes an hour to do a section most people won't even notice. But when you finish, you sit back and realize, it's beautiful. Not in the showy, Instagram-worthy way, but in the I see it now kind of way. The gravel curves, the edge softens, and for a moment, the whole garden breathes. You return the rake to its place in the tool rack. Clean. Ready. Belonging. As the sky darkens, you slide the shed door shut, sealing in the scent of oil and dust and pine. Your hands are sore. Your knees ache. But your breath is steady. Calm, because now, you understand, in a Zen garden, the line between tool and user disappears. You shape the garden, but it also shapes you. You wake to rain. Not the cinematic, thunder and rooftops kind, just a soft, patient drizzle that's been falling all night. The temple roofs wear it like silk. The air is thick with petrichor, that earthy scent rising from soapstone and cedar beams. And for the first time since you arrived, the garden is completely still. No raking today. No gravel to comb or moss to tuck. Just water, pools of it, collecting between the stones like questions without answers. You step onto the wooden ingawa, the covered porch that runs along the edge of the temple, and pause. The rain slides off the roof in clean sheets, splashing down into stone basins, seeping into the moss, darkening the gravel until it's the color of storm clouds. And just like that, you understand why they say Zen gardens are designed for viewing, not walking. You wouldn't dare step into it now. It's too perfect. You sit on the platform and breathe. The monks join you in silence, robes damp from temple errands. No one speaks. One passes you a cup of roasted tea, bitter, hot, grounding. You sip slowly, eyes never leaving the scene in front of you. This garden, one you've raked, planted, sketched, cleaned, and quietly resented, now looks like a painting. The rain softens its edges, rounds its angles, darkens its textures. It's still the same space. But under rain, it becomes something else entirely. Historians still debate whether Zen gardens were designed for rain. Some suggest they were meant to embody idealized dry landscapes, emulating mountains, islands, and rivers without using water at all. Others argue that rain was an essential ingredient in their emotional recipe. The truth? Probably both. Because nothing in a Zen garden is one thing. A monk leans in and whispers, "Now you see the garden's second life." You nod, but say nothing. Because it's true. The gravel, usually stark and bright, now looks like ink on parchment. Lines you carved days ago are barely visible, softened by puddles. Water collects at the base of the largest rock, your rock, the one you placed under pressure and prayer. It now sits like a mountain surrounded by a temporary sea. You think of something that he told you early on. The garden is not for decoration, it is for witnessing. Today, you're witnessing. And here's a quirky thing. Some temple masters trained apprentices only on rainy days. Not because it was easier, but because it forced them to slow down. To see more. To let go. After all, there's nothing you can fix when water covers everything. No lines to perfect. No edges to sharpen. Just presence. As the rain deepens, you watch how it draws paths across stone and soil. Not straight lines, but wandering rivulets, tiny rivers in temporary places. They pool in the low corners. Slip between moss patches. Trickle down through gravel. You realize that the garden welcomes the rain. Its every dip and rise is designed not just to survive water, but to guide it, hold it, celebrate it. Later, one monk brings out a worn umbrella made of oiled paper and motions for you to follow. You step carefully down the slick stairs into a different part of the temple grounds, the water basin. It's not flashy. Just a squat, weathered stone with a hollow dip in the center, catching the rain. A bamboo spout hangs over it, dripping rhythmically. Plink, plink, plink. You're told to wash your hands. A symbolic act before tea, or prayer, or presence. The water is cold. It wakes you up gently. There's a term, wabi-sabi, a philosophy of beauty that embraces imperfection, impermanence, and the natural passage of time. This basin, this rain, this garden under gray skies, they're all soaked in it. The monk tells you one last fringe fact. In some Zen gardens, puddles are left alone, never swept or drained. They're allowed to form naturally, marking where water wants to rest. Some designers even planned for them. Like a pause in a conversation. A breath between thoughts. You return to the viewing deck and sit again. The rain has lightened now, a fine mist dancing over the gravel. And something stirs in you. Not understanding, exactly, but closeness. Like the garden is no longer just a lesson, or a job, or an art project. It's a companion. It's teaching without speaking. You smile at the rock in the middle, the one you placed, doubted, debated. It still sits, still slightly off-center. But today, it looks wise. Wet, moss-flecked, weathered, and quietly certain. You whisper, "You were right." It doesn't answer. But it doesn't need to. The rain has passed. Morning sun creeps slowly across the rooftops, steam curling from damp tiles. The garden glows in patches, gravel glinting like powdered silver, moss dark and saturated, and the rocks slick, contemplative, as if they've just woken from a deep sleep. Today, you're given an unusual assignment. You won't be raking or planting or sanding wood. Instead, the head monk hands you a folded piece of cloth, a long, narrow banner, and says simply, "Hang it." You follow him to a wooden post at the edge of the garden, just beyond the viewing platform. The banner is white, made of linen so fine it flutters in your hands. It bears a single calligraphic character, painted in bold, imperfect strokes. You don't recognize the symbol. It means listen, the monk says, before stepping away. You nod, trying not to show your confusion. Hang it? In a garden where everything is silent? But that's exactly the point. As you secure the banner, it catches the morning breeze. It shifts, folds, whispers. It doesn't dominate the space, it punctuates it. You sit back and watch. The wind plays gently across the gravel. A single leaf tumbles from a nearby maple. The banner twists once, twice, then stills. And for the first time, you hear the garden. Not literally, of course. There's no music. No bird song right now. But the garden has a tone. A mood. A kind of internal rhythm, subtle and persistent, like background breath. You realize, the gravel holds silence, but it's not empty. The moss absorbs sound like felt. The rocks hum with the heat of the morning sun. The air, the wind, the distant creak of the temple beams, they're all part of the composition. Historians still argue whether Zen gardens were originally intended as spaces for meditation or for passive viewing by aristocrats and priests. But the consensus is that somewhere along the line, they became soundless sanctuaries, places designed not just for looking, but for listening to what exists without noise. And now, you're beginning to hear it, too. The monks spend the morning in careful, quiet rituals. One sweeps the steps. Another tends to a kettle in the tea house nearby. You're invited to help string small pieces of dried bamboo along the edge of the roof. They're not for decoration, they're drip guides, shaping how rain falls off the eaves. When wind blows through them, they rattle softly, like chimes with secrets. Later, you walk the outer path again. This time instructed to do so without looking at the garden. Let it speak behind you, the monk says. You try. At first, it feels silly. You keep glancing over your shoulder, tempted to admire what you've helped shape. But the monk gently taps your shoulder each time. Don't seek it. Feel it. So you walk. The gravel crunches underfoot. The wind brushes your sleeves. Somewhere behind you, a bird lands. You don't turn around. Instead, you focus on the echo. How the space feels different when you're not facing it. You begin to understand that the garden's presence is not visual, it's atmospheric. You carry it with you, even when it disappears from view. Here's a quirky fact: in some temples, visitors were once required to experience the garden backwards, literally walking away from it, so the final memory wasn't what they saw, but what lingered. An afterimage. A kind of internal echo. Later that afternoon, you're tasked with repairing a simple bamboo fence that separates one corner of the garden from the tea house path. It's barely waist-high, more suggestion than barrier. As you tie fresh twine around the slats, a monk tells you, the fence isn't to keep people out. It's to remind them they're entering something sacred. That's the strange paradox of Zen gardens. They invite stillness, but not ownership. You can't take them home. You can't pick the flowers, there aren't any. You can't even photograph them properly. What makes them beautiful is what slips away. You finish your work and sit once more on the viewing platform. The banner still flutters gently. The stones haven't moved. The gravel, raked in the morning by someone else now, holds perfect curves you'll never replicate. But you're not trying to anymore. Because now you know the truth, the garden isn't something you build. It's something you become part of. You watch as the shadows stretch and shrink, the sunlight tracing quiet arcs across the earth. The gravel glows white again. Dry now, almost soft in the light. A bee hums past. A monk coughs gently behind a sliding door. And the garden waits. Not for applause. Not for perfection. Just for stillness. And you're finally ready to offer it. You've been at the temple long enough now that no one tells you what to do. They don't need to. You rise at the same hour each morning, slip your sandals on without sound, and find your place in the garden before the bell even finishes its first slow ring. It's no longer discipline. It's gravity. Your body moves the way water does, seeking the lowest, quietest point. Today, the monks gesture toward the west corner of the garden. A newer section. Less refined. Slightly unbalanced. It needs a central rock. A feature stone. They say nothing more. Just leave a wheelbarrow of stones for you to examine. This is a test. Stone placement, you now understand, is the soul of the Zen garden. More than gravel. More than moss. The stone is the idea. The raking just follows. You crouch, looking over the candidates. One is tall and jagged, like a broken tooth. One is squat and smooth, like an old loaf of bread. A third is narrow, leaning, almost comically awkward. Each has a personality. Each says something different. You're not just choosing a rock. You're choosing a story. In traditional karesansui, dry landscape design, stones often represent islands, mountains, or animals. Sometimes Buddhas. Sometimes nothing at all. Historians still argue whether the meaning was ever fixed or if interpretation was always part of the ritual. Some temples record their symbolic intention. Others let the viewer decide. Either way, you know this much: the rock matters. You select one, neither the tallest nor the smoothest. A mid-sized granite boulder, rough-textured, slightly asymmetrical. It has a lean, a slope, a tension. Like it wants to move, but knows it won't. You place it with great care. First, you dig a hollow in the gravel. Not too deep. Not too shallow. You nestle the stone in so that a third of it disappears beneath the surface, anchoring it in place. A rock simply perched on top would look fake. Everything in the garden must feel inevitable. You step back. No. You shift it slightly to the left. Now. Still no. You shift again. Just a fraction. And suddenly, it clicks. Not audibly. Just inside you. You see the lines of gravel that will curve around it. You see the shadows it will cast in the afternoon. You see how the stone feels, not how it looks. The empty space beside it becomes part of the story. A younger monk watches from the side and says, "You placed it like a question mark." You smile. Exactly. You spend the rest of the morning raking around it, testing patterns, some spiraling, some straight. You rake a wide arc, then rake it again, tighter, until the gravel sings in its silence. The new stone sits in the center like a thought you can't quite shake. Not loud. Just persistent. A fringe tidbit the monks share over miso lunch: there are actual manuals, some centuries old, on stone arrangement. They prescribe triads, 3 stones in specific relationships, guardian stones, and even flight paths for imaginary cranes. One garden legend claims a master once rejected a rock because it breathed too loud. You believe it now. That afternoon, you walk the full length of the garden slowly, deliberately, taking note of every rock's position. None are symmetrical. None are evenly spaced. And yet, the whole space feels balanced. Because the garden isn't built on order, it's built on harmony. And harmony is messier than you'd expect. You sit across from your new stone as the sun slides westward. It doesn't thank you, but it stays. Confident. Still. Present. And you feel something shift in you, too, because placing that stone wasn't about getting it right. It was about finding where it belonged. Where it could rest, be seen, be understood. You gave it that place. And in doing so, you found your own. Later that evening, one of the elder monks pats your shoulder and murmurs, "You're ready to name it." You blank. Name it? But he's serious. It's a tradition, ancient and rarely spoken. Every rock in a temple garden has a name, even if no one says it aloud. Some are named for shapes: turtle stone, crane wing, sleeping cloud. Others for moods: doubt, patience, regret, joy. You don't announce your stone's name. You just whisper it to yourself, heart tucked between syllables. Then, you bow to it. And it, of course, says nothing. But it knows. The temple holds a tea ceremony tonight. Not for visitors. Just the monks. And you. You're told to wash your hands, wear clean robes, and, oddly, comb your hair. The monks don't usually care about appearances, but tonight is different. Special. You walk to the tea house slowly, past the garden that has become a second skin to you. The stones you've placed, the moss you've coaxed into life, the rake patterns you can still feel in your shoulders, they're all there, holding still beneath the moonlight. You bow without thinking. And the garden, of course, does what it always does, it listens. The tea house is tucked behind a bamboo screen, low-roofed and humble, with sliding doors that creak like secrets. You duck inside and kneel on the tatami mat. Everything smells of roasted green tea, sandalwood, and pine smoke. At the center of the room is a single flower in a clay vase. Not a bouquet. Just one. Pale. Leaning. Delicate in its own exhaustion. A monk enters. He bows. You bow. And so begins the tea. The ceremony is achingly slow. Every motion choreographed, but not robotic. The ladle dips. The kettle hisses. The bamboo whisk swirls in small, steady loops. You watch the tea foam rise like a slow breath, then settle into stillness. You're handed the bowl with both hands. It's warm. Heavy. Not quite symmetrical. You sip. It's earthy, bitter, alive. Like soil and memory and moss steeped in time. No one talks, because the silence is the point. In fact, the entire tea ceremony exists to echo the same values as the garden outside: balance, impermanence, intention. Historians still debate whether the tea ceremony evolved from Zen garden culture or alongside it. But the link is unmistakable. One shapes space with gravel. The other, with gesture. Both are acts of quiet resistance in a world obsessed with noise. The monk beside you gently sets down his bowl. A perfect garden, he says, should feel like a tea ceremony held in stillness. You understand now. The tea, like the stone, is a pause. A moment held in cupped hands. You don't drink it to taste it. You drink it to notice it. Here's a quirky tidbit: traditional tea masters used to select the ugliest bowls on purpose. The cracked ones. The off-kilter ones. The ones that made you pause, not for their perfection, but their truth. That's wabi-sabi, again. Beauty not in the flawless, but in the fragile. After the tea is finished, the bowls are passed around. Not to show off, but to admire the imperfections. One has a scar line running through it, filled with gold, kintsugi, the art of repair that celebrates brokenness. A bowl cracked and mended becomes more valuable, not less. You think of the reiki restored. The rock you doubted. The gravel patterns that vanished in the rain. You think of your own tired body. Your calloused hands. Your crooked posture from days of kneeling in gravel. And you wonder if maybe you, too, have been filled with gold somewhere along the way. The monk rises. The bowls are cleaned. The room is swept. The tea ceremony ends not with applause or bows, but with silence. You step outside into the night, and the garden is still there. Only now, it's different, because you are different. The moon casts silver over the gravel sea. Your rock casts a long shadow, like a sundial of your own progress. The banner still flutters on its post, unreadable to anyone who doesn't already understand. You feel the wind. You feel the stillness. And somehow, you feel seen. No one praises you. No one hands you a scroll or a certificate. But the garden looks at you, and you know, you've become part of it. You wake before dawn. Not because anyone rings a bell. Not because you're told to. But because something inside you knows it's time. The sky is still navy blue, wrapped in the hush that only comes just before first light. You slip into your sandals and step outside. There's no plan today. No assignment. No chore to complete. Just you. And the garden. The gravel glows faintly under the thinning moon. Your breath clouds in the air. The world feels like it's holding its breath. You don't head to the rake shed. You don't gather moss. You simply walk. Slowly. Quietly. One step at a time along the garden's edge, where the bamboo railings meet the path of worn stepping stones. Your footfalls make the softest thuds against the earth, as if the ground already knows your rhythm. And you begin to notice what you've been trained to notice. The way the gravel has shifted ever so slightly overnight, disturbed by wind or maybe a fox's quiet visit. The way the moss drinks up the dew, turning from olive to deep emerald in slow motion. The way your rock, casts no shadow now, just waits patiently for sunrise to trace its outline again. You stop in front of it and bow. It's become your little ritual, this silent exchange of respect between person and stone. A nod from one part of the earth to another. You sit cross-legged on the edge of the platform, facing the garden. The monks begin to stir behind the walls, faint rustles of robes, footsteps softened by tatami mats. A bell rings once. Low. Like the garden's heart beating. There's no rake in your hand. No task. And still, your work continues. Because now you see what you couldn't before. The garden is never finished. It changes with the light. With the temperature. With the moods of those who enter and the hands that shape it. Even when it seems still, it moves. Through time. Through presence. 3. Historians still argue about what qualifies as a true Zen garden. Must it contain gravel? Moss? Should it follow the ancient rules or break them entirely? But you realize now, none of that matters. The truth is in the attention, the stillness, the humility, and yes, sometimes the imperfection. A French fact you overheard yesterday returns to your thoughts. Some garden masters intentionally misplace a stone. They make the curve of a rake line slightly uneven. Not as a mistake, but as a reminder, that even in pursuit of harmony, there is room for mystery. You look around and you see it, a tiny imperfection in the gravel, one you missed. A rake line that curls a little too tightly before releasing. You almost move to fix it, but instead, you smile. Because the garden is not a painting, it's a mirror. And mirrors, as you've learned, are rarely flawless. You sit and watch as the sun climbs slowly. It casts a golden sheen across the garden, turning each granule of gravel into a whisper of light. The lines you drew days ago reappear. Your rock glows faintly. The moss along the edges exhales steam. And just like that, the garden is new again. You rise. Your knees pop in protest. And you take a slow, quiet walk back through the temple, past the water basin where the rain once danced, past the shed that smells of pine oil and memory, past the banner that still reads "Listen" in bold black strokes. You've listened. And now, the garden listens back. It's your last full day at the temple. You don't mark it with sadness, exactly, just a quiet awareness. Like a warm cup that's almost empty. The taste is still there, but the moment is nearly gone. A monk hands you a small broom made from bundled twigs. No ceremony. No cryptic message this time. Just a soft pat on the shoulder and a glance toward the perimeter path that runs around the entire garden, where fallen leaves collect like soft secrets. You begin to sweep. It's not gravel, not moss. Just the path. But you take the task seriously. After all, this is where the viewers walk. Their first step. Their last look. The frame that holds the whole picture. You sweep gently. The broom barely disturbs the earth. It glides over the packed soil, brushing away bits of leaf, dust, and the occasional stubborn pine needle that refuses to leave quietly. You crouch, lift it with your fingers, and place it off the path. No one will notice. But that's not the point. As you work, you start to recognize the path not just as an edge, but as an invitation. Every temple garden has one. A boundary. A suggestion. It doesn't shout "Look here." It whispers, "Come closer, if you're ready." You think about how many people have walked this path without stepping into the garden. Tourists, monks, emperors, you. Each bringing their own weight, their own questions. And the garden, unfazed, holds them all without reply. Historians still argue whether these outer paths were meant solely for guests or if monks used them for their own meditations, walking the circle endlessly like a clock made of footsteps. Either way, the path is part of the design. Not outside it. As you sweep, you find a cracked pebble tucked beneath the root. You pocket it. Not as a souvenir, but as a reminder that even the edges matter. Maybe especially the edges. You finish your sweep just as the morning fog lifts, revealing the garden in full clarity. It looks ordinary. Not magical. Not perfect. Just what it is. And yet, that's enough. Because the longer you look, the more it reveals. You notice, for the first time, how the tallest rock casts a faint echo in the rake lines, a ripple that bends the entire pattern. You see how the moss curls upward around the edge of a stone, almost as if in embrace. You even spot one tiny weed poking through the gravel, a wild interruption, small and defiant. You leave it, because the garden isn't a battle. It's a balance. Here's a fringe fact: in some temples, the gardeners plant a single weed on purpose. It keeps them humble. It reminds them that perfection isn't the goal, presence is. You sit on the Ngawa again, your favorite spot, and watch the afternoon arrive. The wind picks up. A few leaves tumble across the gravel. The rake lines blur ever so slightly. You don't move to fix them. Instead, you breathe. And the garden breathes with you. A monk joins you. He holds 2 cups of tea. One for you. One for the silence between you. He sets them down. You drink. No one says a word, because there's nothing left to explain. When you finish, he speaks. Tomorrow, you leave. But the garden stays. You nod. But you understand what he really means. You'll take it with you. Not the rocks. Not the gravel. Not the rake. But the stillness. The patience. The strange, necessary joy of doing something that no one will see, and doing it well anyway. You stand. One more sweep of the broom across the path. A soft bow to the space that shaped you. And then you turn toward your room. One last night before departure. One more evening of silence, sandals tucked neatly by the door, gravel whispering in your dreams. Your bag is light. Not because you've forgotten anything, but because the temple has changed your sense of weight. You now know that heaviness has nothing to do with objects, and everything to do with noise, and you've shed a lot of noise. The morning is cool. Mist lingers at the edges of the garden, curling like incense smoke around the bases of rocks. A monk hands you your last task. No words. Just a small, wooden board with a brush and a shallow bowl of black ink. You kneel beside the entrance gate, where a tall slab of weathered wood bears the faint shadows of brushstrokes from years past. This is where guests first arrive, where the garden greets them, long before they know how to look. You're meant to write one word, one character, a parting gift. You stare at the blank board for a long time. The brush trembles slightly in your fingers, not from nerves, but reverence. You think of all you've learned, the careful placement of stones, the hush of moss, the whispered curves of rake lines, the crack in the teacup, the weed that was left to grow. And you write just one word. Nothing flashy. Just true. You hang it on the post, just as another visitor steps through the gate, sandals scuffing softly against the path. He looks at the board. Then at you. Then at the garden beyond. And he smiles. You bow. Then you walk the perimeter path one last time, slow and barefoot. Each footstep sinks just slightly into the earth. Each breath tastes of pine, of gravel dust, of memory. You pause at your rock. It waits, exactly where you placed it. Exactly where it will remain. You don't say goodbye, because nothing in the garden ever truly leaves. It just returns to stillness. The monks gather quietly by the gate as you leave, nodding without ceremony. One of them presses a small wrapped parcel into your palm. Later, you'll open it to find a piece of the banner, just a sliver, with one black brushstroke curling like a question. A whisper, listen. And you do. The road beyond the temple is wide and open. Birds call overhead. Someone chops firewood nearby. A scooter whines in the distance. But underneath it all, you hear the hush. The garden never stopped speaking. You just finally learned how to hear it. And now, as your breath softens and your eyes begin to close, you can let the garden fade into the gentle corners of your mind. Not gone. Just folded away like a well-worn robe, always nearby, always ready when you need stillness. You remember the gravel, how it held your footsteps like secrets. The stones, how they taught you to stand without speaking. The moss, how it taught you to wait. And the silence, oh, the silence, it was never empty. Just full of space, of patience, of listening. Let your thoughts settle now, like the last rake lines drawn before dusk. Let the edges of your day soften, like gravel after the rain. Let your breath find the rhythm of those curves, each inhale a gentle sweep, each exhale a pause in the pattern. There is no more to do tonight. No gravel to comb. No leaf to sweep. No rock to place. Only rest. Let yourself drift into stillness, because even in sleep, you carry the garden. It will wait for you, as it always has. Quiet, present, and unchanged by time. Good night, traveler.
Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh. Thì chớp nhán nhán được rồi. tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh.
Quay nó không có rõ đâu, không quay như vậy. Không có rõ đâu. Nói xì kìa như nói này quay đâu.
Thì chớp chớp nhán nhán được rồi. quay máy là quay gỡ dàn thịnh.
Quay nó có đỏ đâu, không quay lại. Không có đỏ. Má xịn kìa, chứ má này quay đâu.
Thì chớp chớp nhán nhán được rồi. dằn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh.
quay nó có đỏ đâu, không quay không có đỏ. Nói xịn kìa, chứ nói này quay đâu.
Thì chớp chớp nhán nhán được rồi. Dằn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh.
quay
chớp nhán nhán được rồi. Quay máy là quay gỡ dần thịnh.
Quay nó có đỏ đâu, không quay nó lại. Nó không có đỏ. Má xịn kìa chứ nói này quay đúng.
Thì chớp chớp nhán nhán được rồi. chặt tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gỡ cho anh Thịnh.
quay nó có đỏ đâu, không quay không có đỏ. Nói xịn kìa chứ nói vậy quay đâu.
Thì chớp chớp nhăn